I just want to say really great that we can be here together today for this Reader Day. I think we've got some really interesting time together as we reflect particularly on the ministry of welcome, a really important and an integral part of our life and our ministry as a church as we live these extraordinary times. And we spoke quite a bit, didn't we, over the kind of spring and then into the summer about how we were all looking forward to a rest, but recognizing that when we came back, it wasn't that everything was going to be easy. When we came back, there were going to be the same challenges that remain with us. And I think that's absolutely so in what we are seeing now in our nation. That challenge to us as a church, and we've been asked, someone said the other day, we were asked both to get on with the day job and to think creatively about how we manage our way through these extraordinary times in which we're living, and that is immensely demanding of us. So thank you for all that you are doing. I hope the whole of today is peppered with that sense of thanks for that. What we are engaged in as a church matters, always matters. It's always fundamental. It's always our calling. It matters now, especially so, and no more so than with the ministry of welcome at the heart of it. So a great celebration today of Reader Ministry, of the life of our church. A great celebration, of course, with Nigel and Ian, who are going to be admitted as readers and licensed this afternoon. Are you there, Nigel, Ian? Could you unmute yourself? Just say hello quickly. That would be great.
Hello, Ian here. Hello, everyone. We look forward to this afternoon.
Ian, and just tell us, Ian, where you're going to be serving and...
I am going to be licensed to St Barnabas in Gloucester, and I'll be very happy this afternoon because my incumbent is also my wife, so they're in a double support. That's
very, very splendid. My neighbours here from where I live in Gloucester, so Ian, that's fantastic. And Nigel.
Hi, morning all. Yes, I'm here, and I'm looking forward to this afternoon also. I'm going to be based in Newnham, Orr and Blakeney, a wonderful community which I'm very blessed to be able to serve.
Lovely, thank you. Well, we look forward to that. We're sorry that so few of us can be there. That's part of the COVID regulations, but really glad that we can be meeting in the cathedral and all of us here holding you in our prayers. We should pray and worship, and Anne, you are going to lead us in our opening prayers.
Thank you, Catherine. If you'd like to share the PowerPoint, and Ian, if you wouldn't mind being our all, that's what I meant. So when there's everybody's response, if you unmute and respond on the behalf of the whole congregation, that would be super. Let's still ourselves as we come to this day. You, O Lord, are in the midst of us, and we are called by your name. Leave us not, O Lord our God. Lord, open my lips,
that my mouth may proclaim your praise.
Make haste and save me, God.
Lord, come quickly to my help.
The world belongs to God.
The earth and its people are his.
How good and lovely it is
to live together in unity.
Love and faith come together.
Justice and peace join hands.
If the Lord's disciples keep silent,
these stones would shout aloud.
Lord, open our lips,
and our mouths shall proclaim your praise.
Glory to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit.
As it was in the beginning, is now, and will be forever. Amen.
A reading from 1 Peter. Above all, maintain constant love for one another, for love covers a multitude of sins. Be hospitable to one another without complaining. Like good stewards of the manifold grace of God, serve one another with whatever gift each of you has received. Whoever speaks must do so as one speaking with the very words of God. Whoever serves must do so with the strength that God supplies, so that God may be glorified in all things through Jesus Christ. To him belong the glory and the power forever and ever. Amen. God, our Creator, your kindness has brought us the gift of this day. Help us not to cling to yesterday, nor covet tomorrow, but to celebrate the uniqueness of today. We pray together as our Saviour has taught us. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as in heaven. Give us today our daily bread. Forgive us our sins, as we forgive those who sin against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For the kingdom, the power, and the glory are yours, now and forever. Amen. Lord, set your blessing on us as we begin this day together.
Confirm in us the truth by which we rightly live. Confront us with the truth from which we wrongly turn. We ask not for what we want, but for what you know we need, as we offer this day and ourselves for you and to you. Through Jesus Christ our Saviour. Amen.
The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
It is really great to welcome Archdeacon Phil and Archdeacon Hilary to share their thoughts with us today. I'm hoping that both of you will give us a little introduction to yourselves as we go through this day. Tell us of your love of football and things, Phil. Share something of those things that thrill your heart. As well as sharing your very deep wisdom and your wonder and excitement at the welcome of God. So I'd like to hand over to Phil. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Anne. It's a real privilege and a delight to be.
You've muted her.
No, I don't know what happened there. I thought I was unmuted. A real delight and a privilege to join you and to be able to speak to you. The deep wisdom, of course, will come from my colleague Hilary, and I'm just the warm-up act. That's the way we live our lives, really. So I've been in the diocese for nearly 4 years. It'll be 4 years in March. I took over, of course, from Bishop Robert, an impossible person to follow.
Archdeacon Phil, are you still there?
See what happens when you make comments.
Can people...
Sorry, can you hear me?
We lost you for a minute, but you're back now.
You just said how wonderful the Bishop of Tewkesbury was, and then you froze.
Well, maybe that was the Lord's voice. Next time that happens, I'll say, "Speak, Lord," Your servant is listening. Give me a wave. I hope my internet's all right. It's generally been quite good so far. So just a little bit about me. I'm married to Sue. We live in West Cheltenham, and we have 3 boys all around the country. And my most exciting bit of news in the last few months is that I became a granddad, which is something I feel far too young, and I know look far too young to be, but I now have a nearly 10-week-old granddaughter, Emilia, which is just a wonderful experience. Some of you can relate to that. And I am a Nottingham Forest supporter. So yeah, whether I like good football, you can judge for yourselves. When Anne asked Hilary and I if we'd speak today, she said, would you say something about an aspect of mission that excites you? And it might be that you're a bit surprised to see the ministry of welcome as our title today. Welcome, of course, is one of those things that it's very easy to think of as something that's about just coming to us. And mission, of course, is about being sent. So what's welcome got to do with mission? Well, that's what I want to explore, what we want to explore with you today. When Hilary and I are doing one of the things we do quite a lot of, people wonder what on earth archdeacons do, but we do quite a lot of interviewing for clergy who are applying for new posts in the diocese. One of the questions that we often ask clergy is this. I hope I'm not giving too many secrets away. We often ask them, how would you articulate the good news of the gospel in as few words as possible? Surprising how challenging that question sometimes is for some of our clergy. I'm sure that our lay readers would just walk it very easily. I wonder what your response would be if I asked you that this morning. But what if I made that even more difficult a question? What if I were to say to you, what one word sums up the gospel? What one word encapsulates, in a nutshell, the good news of the gospel for you? If you were to ask me that question, there are a number of possibilities. One of them might be reconciliation. In one of my favorite passages in 2 Corinthians chapter 5, Paul effectively sums up the gospel in that word. He says that God has in Christ reconciled us to himself and given us the ministry of reconciliation. So reconciliation might be one of my candidates, but the other one is the one I'm going to talk about this morning, and that's the word welcome. When I served as a parish priest, as a vicar in Surrey before I came here, I was governor of our local parish school, which was I was very involved in. I used to love telling the children when I would go and answer questions when they had Grill the Vicar, they'd invariably ask me questions like, what's your favourite colour? And I would say, do you know, I don't know what God's favourite colour is, but I think I know what his favourite word is. And they'd go, oh, really? And I would say, I think God's favourite word might be welcome. I want to suggest that to you this morning. Today, we want to think about welcome and its centrality in the gospel, but its centrality too in the need for us to experience God's welcome in order to proclaim it afresh in each generation, to share as ministers of reconciliation, as ministers of welcome today. You could say that the Bible starts and ends with the welcome of God. That lovely picture of the Garden of Eden. And the Creator God has created everything and says it's very good. And I can almost imagine him with pride showing Adam and Eve round and saying, look at all this, isn't it very good? And you are welcome to share it with me. To share in tending it, looking after it, and ruling over it. And at the end, in Revelation 21, that lovely picture of the New Jerusalem, God's dwelling place from now on will be with humanity. That sense of God welcoming us into this new place of belonging together. a belonging that will include the whole of creation. Again, in Romans 8, that lovely sense in which the whole of creation will be set free from its bondage to decay and brought into the glorious freedom of the children of God. An extraordinary picture of welcome. I want, though, this morning to root our thoughts about welcome in a passage that will be very familiar to you all and you won't be surprised by. And it's the story of the prodigal son in Luke 15, or as some people are now calling it, the prodigal father. And I want to read this through with you. And as we read, I want to reflect on it as best we can from the perspective of some of the original listeners, particularly to think about how the Pharisees and the teachers of the law might have reacted to Jesus first telling this story. I've chosen the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, sadly, because sometimes it's very easy for us as licensed ministers to start to look a little bit like them. We, some of us anyway, dress up quite regularly, and we have authority in the communities we serve, like them. And the context of the story of the prodigal son is set out in verses 1 and 2 of Luke 15. You might like to have it open if you've got a Bible with you. The context is this: now the tax collectors and sinners were all gathered round to hear Jesus, but the Pharisees and teachers of the law muttered, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." And I want, as we read the story, to try and imagine what the muttering might have sounded like, especially in a context which is deeply hierarchical and patriarchal, a society which is bound by an honour-shame culture, as many societies are around the world today, where the thing you long for most for yourself and your family is to be honoured, and where the thing you dread even more than death itself is someone bringing shame into your family. So from verse 11, Jesus continued, "There was a man who had 2 sons. Already I can hear some muttering. Oh, 2 sons, lucky man. God must be looking with favour on him. The younger one said to his father, 'Father, give me my share of the estate.' The muttering suddenly gets louder. Shock, horror. What this son is saying is, 'Dad, I can't wait for you to die. Let me have my inheritance now.' What a shameful thing for a son to say. But how is the father going to react? Hopefully he'll give him a flea in his ear and disown him. Jesus continues, so he divided the property between them. Goodness me, what an idiot. Shame on you, colluding with this dishonour. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. A bit more muttering. Well, I told you so. That's what happens when children aren't put in their place, reminded of our customs, when they dishonour their father, when they bring shame on the family. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. Perhaps the muttering takes a turn. Oh, good. He's got his just deserts. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. Feed pigs? Just when you thought it couldn't get more shameful, that's as low as it's possible to stoop. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants had food to spare, and here I am starving to death. I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.'" The muttering is bad, too right. "Make me like one of your hired servants." So he got up and went to his father. By this point, the muttering has stopped. They're speechless. The sense of shame hangs over every part of this story. But while he was still a long way off, While he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him and kissed him. The muttering is back. What an idiot. Will he never learn? He's leaving himself wide open to being abused again. The son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer to be worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his servants, quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate, for this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. So they began to celebrate. Perhaps by now they've stopped listening to Jesus. They're muttering amongst themselves. Doesn't he realize how our society works? Doesn't he see that he's taken on himself the shame that should have been his son's? Doesn't he see that in this ridiculous welcome, in this reclothing him with all the symbols of belonging and homecoming and honor, he's honoring someone who deserves nothing but shame? If that's what they're thinking, they find an ally as the story continues. Meanwhile, the elder son was in the field. When he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of the servants and asked him what was going on. Your brother has come, he replied, and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound. The elder brother became angry and refused to go in. Quite right, they mutter. Never mind the shame. This is the elder son's inheritance he's spending on a party. But he answered his father, look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours who has squandered your property with prostitutes comes home, you killed the fatted calf for him. My son, the father said, you are always with me and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. Back to the context in verses 1 and 2. This man, they muttered, welcomes sinners and eats with them. And it's as if in telling this story, Jesus owns that criticism. Of course I do. Why? Well, let me tell you a bit about my Father's welcome and what it looks like. So many words, aren't there, that we could apply to the welcome we see in this story. Just a few that come to my mind. It's an unforced welcome, as a welcome, a real welcome, always is. With a heavy heart, the father lets the younger son go. And then, although he pleads with him, doesn't force the elder son to join the party. It's an undeserved welcome. It's unexpected by the hearers and especially by the younger son. It's unconditional. It's extravagant, prodigal. It's lavish. What a lovely word lavish is. John in his first epistle tells us, see what great love the Father has lavished on us, that we should be called children of God. And that is what we are. It's a shocking welcome. It's outrageous, especially in the context of societal norms in its day. It's shame-absorbing and honor-giving. But it's costly. It costs the Father everything. Reminding us, of course, of the cross. But it's also very sadly divisive. Some people find this level of grace just too much to cope with. It's a welcome that makes possible our deepest needs: reconnection, reconciliation, homecoming, belonging. It's a welcome that has hospitality written all across it. I have a friend who has a definition of hospitality that I quite like. He says, hospitality is making people feel at home when you wish they were. But that's not God's hospitality. God's hospitality is making us feel at home because we are at home. In the lovely words of St. Augustine, you made us for yourself and our hearts are restless till they find their rest in you. But it's also a welcome that doesn't just wait, but runs out like the Father to meet us where we are. A welcome you and I are called to take out to people where they are, not just wait for them to come to us. It's a missional welcome, a sent welcome. And it's also a welcome that transforms us, that, if you like, reclothes us. I think there's some great symbolism in changing clothes from rags to clothes of honor and significance and belonging. Our calling, your calling, my calling then in mission might be summed up as taking the welcome of God to all people everywhere, including those we think are least likely to respond to it. Jesus finishes the story with, "He was lost and is found," echoing one of his own, what I think of as a mission statement of Jesus in Luke 19, in the story of Zacchaeus. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost. To be a minister of the gospel, which you and I are called to be, is to join with Jesus Christ in making known the welcome of God in all its extravagance to all people. This ministry of reconciliation. How do we do that? We do it by proclaiming it in our teaching, but also embodying it in our living. One of the challenges I think we face in this generation is that it's much harder to get this welcome out across the threshold of the church, partly because of the way people view our churches. What words, I wonder, would the 95% plus who don't ever come into a church building or onto a Zoom church meeting, what words would they use to describe the church today? If we're honest, I don't think many of them would use the word welcome as one of their first. How many times, I wonder, have you heard a mum with a screaming child who's come to church, perhaps for the first time in many years, say, "I was made so welcome"? I know there are stories of where that has happened, and that's fantastic. But wouldn't it be amazing if there were far more? Catherine's just going to show us a short video clip. I'm running towards the end of my time, but I thought you deserved a commercial break. This is a video that was shot for a commercial, but it was also, as I understand it, shot really with hidden cameras. Catherine. Not seeing it at the moment. Sorry, I can't hear you, Catherine.
Phil, while Catherine's sorting that out, I wonder, we're going to go and have some discussion in groups in a moment. If you had a key question for us to talk about, what would that be? So
in a moment, Catherine was going to put some questions on your chat, but let me just read them through to you then, and then we'll come back and see if we can.
As always, Archdeacon, you're ahead of me. Oh,
yeah, that's all right. That's all right, Bishop. It's very rare. But the questions I'm going to ask you are these. How do you react to the idea that the whole of the gospel can be summed up in the word welcome? What are the strengths and weaknesses of this assertion? To what extent and in what ways does the welcome of your worshipping community, especially to those who are not regulars, mirror that of the Father to the prodigal son? What's missing? What can you do about this? I've got far too many questions, and you'll see them later, so you don't need to take them down, but you might want to choose one. In our church communities, what hurdles might deter anyone from wanting to know more about the Christian faith? Can you share an example of someone who has been reclothed by their experience of the welcome of God? What did this transformation look like, and how did it impact them and others? And finally, what might it look like to take the welcome of God out into the street to meet people while they are still a long way off? Catherine, are we possible?
It's loaded. Right, hang on. Are you ready for it?
Yeah, go.
Yeah, great.
It's not wanting to play, is it?
Oh, is it not playing for you?
No, are you on a shared screen, Catherine? Sometimes it might be going onto your shared screen, not onto the, if you've got a
Right,
double
let me
screen.
just I've unplugged the other screen.
Yeah,
Let me just press play
I've had that
again.
before. Sorry, I think that's what's happened.
Try that. It did crash my computer completely a minute ago, you know, it all froze. I've taken out the other cable. You have it on yours actually, Ken?
No, I do. Yes, I can share.
Yeah, I've enabled screen sharing.
Okay, shall I try that then?
Yeah, maybe try that, because it's just frozen my computer again now.
It says you cannot screen share while the other participant is sharing. So if you
Yeah.
stop sharing.
There we go.
Okay. Right, there we go. I had it. Let's see if it works. Right, see if this works. I hope you saw that all right. I show that video because it says something to me about what some people feel when they come into church for the first time. And the trouble is, the longer we've been members of a church community, the harder it is to see the hurdles to coming in and joining a Christian community, or even dipping your toe in the water. Maybe when people do overcome that, what can be intimidating walk across the threshold or into a Zoom meeting, we need to treat them a little bit like that and break out the Carlsberg and celebrate with welcome, even though they won't know how to behave or act or speak in church. We need to expand, give, share that extraordinary, extravagant welcome of God. I'm going to finish with one last quote. This is actually from a surprising place. It's from a book called Repitching the Tent, all about reordering churches. but it's a really powerful quote from Richard Giles. It says, "Our task as Christians with a welcome to give and a story to tell is to remove one by one every obstacle which might just conceivably deter anyone, however improbable it may seem to us, from taking a closer look at who we are and what we are doing." Amen.
Phil, thank you. Thank you so much. Now, Anne, right, we're going to go into groups now. We're running just a touch late, but it was definitely worth it. I think alongside Messy Church and Muddy Church, we now have Carlsberg Church. I look forward to that as the next Sunday morning. And we're into groups timing-wise. Anne, what do you suggest we do?
So we want to be pulled back in, Catherine, just before 5:02, please.
Okay, just before 5:02, so about 20 minutes ish, isn't it?
And Phil, will you just share the questions in the chat?
I've just popped it in the chat now, hopefully. That should be in there.
Speaking, you're ahead of me, or Catherine, you're ahead of me. As always, as always.
We're both ahead of you, Bishop.
Not difficult, not difficult. Thanks. Some people start from the top of the questions and some from the bottoms, and we'll kind of look at all of them. Great, well, let's go to groups.
You should have a message on your screen to join a breakout group. Let's see which. We'll put you in. There we go. I wonder if it's because you came in slightly later.
Welcome back, everybody. Hope you had a good bit of discussion. We are going to break for coffee in just 4 or so minutes time. If there are things that you would like to share, do please put that into the chat. And if anybody is brave enough to come and share something out loud, it'd be good just to pick up 1 or 2 things that people have been saying. Just tell me in the chat, and I will call you to speak. Anybody feeling brave? Just a bit of reflection from the group chat that you have been having. Otherwise, I shall pick on someone. Oh, look, Linda Jarvis. There we are. You're sitting there looking at me. Just kind of unmute yourself, and I know you well enough. I can do that to you. Just tell us something that you were talking about in your group.
We talked a little bit really about, of course, with COVID and some of the problems that we've got, and also with Zoom and making people welcome with the Zoom meetings and afterwards with the coffee and the breakout groups that people have been having, and also saying the difficulties in church with making people welcome because of the restrictions in that. So we did talk a little bit about that.
Thank you. I mean, I think that's really helpful, and for me, it's been there've been lots and lots of advantages of Zoom and that way, and we've learned to do things amazingly well. but then also also very much we have that sense of actually how do we do welcome on Zoom? How do we make sure that Zoom, particularly Zoom Church, doesn't just become a friendly club for those who have the right password to get in? I haven't got people saying things on chat, so I'm just going to pick on somebody. Fliss Hall, you're sitting there. I wonder. I'm hoping you're in a different group to that one. Anything that you'd like to share with us?
We talked a lot about funeral ministry as being something particular that readers are able to do. That it gives a longer term opportunity for people to provide that welcome, that introduction. We talked about the aging population of the churches that we're in and how that can really impact how people are welcomed. If somebody comes into your church and sits, this is Alan's story, and sits on somebody else's seat that's been their seat for years, it can be very difficult. How we change those behaviours in our congregations. So those are the things that we talked about. The critical touch points of life. When people are ill and when people are exploring faith, is how do we get ourselves in a position where we're able to be there and take that conversation forward.
Yes, thank you. Really good to hear. Chris Andrew, one, and then we will go to coffee. But Chris, again, hoping you're in a different group. Unmute yourself. Speak to us.
There we go. Can you hear me now?
Yes, can. Yep.
We were talking about hurdles and what hurdles might deter anyone from wanting to know more about the Christian faith. We talked about liturgy. We talked about the sort of church we were, where we were based, and we were sort of very much to do with Zoom as well, and we talked about that's a positive aspect of undoing the hurdles, reaching out through. But we also talked about having the capability within the parish to be able to do that. So it's having people to be able to do that well, and sourcing that.
Thank you.
But I think we also talked about celebrating who we are, not being afraid to celebrate who we are, and because we're all distinct and we're all unique, each and every one of us, and every benefice is distinct and unique. And so I think it was about not being afraid to celebrate that, even though it might be different to somebody else.
Chris, thank you. And as Ken's reminding us, that sense of hurdles on both sides of that, about us getting out as well as actually how we do our welcome, and our welcome, sometimes that sense of going out and engaging, as we were picking up from the story that Archdeacon Phil was reflecting with us about. Please do keep on putting stuff into the chat. We will make sure we capture that. We are going to go to coffee now. Anne, is there anything, I know we've got the plenary panel at the end. Is there anything you want to say about how we're going to do the questions for that we need to be thinking about now?
Absolutely. So it would be really helpful if you've got questions that can be about how we welcome people, how we share this ministry of welcome, or more general questions on the life of the diocese, our vision, our journey together for our plenary panel, which is our 2 bishops and our archdeacons. If you know what you would like to ask now, if you'd like to put it in chat during coffee, then we will be able to look at those questions beforehand. So there will be opportunities, we'll pick things out of chat, but coffee time is quite a good time to put them in so that we can pick out common streams that people are wanting to ask about.
Can't put you on the spot though, Anne, can we, if we have to ask you in advance?
I know you can put us on the spot as well. I promise you can do that, though it'll be about we'll need to work out how in the time we manage that. But
if there are themes that are emerging, if there's a lot of people, for example, asking, so somebody was asking about children and how we're responding as churches, all of that. If there are common themes, we can particularly make sure we pick those out. So you will be able to put the bishops on the spot, Sharon.
Absolutely.
Sherry, don't worry.
And if, can I just say, in terms, either just do it to everybody, or if you prefer, if you look on the chat, you've got a little button where it says probably at the moment to everyone. If you want to do it to Catherine as to the host,
Yeah,
Catherine,
that would be perfect.
so not everybody else sees it, but Catherine and Catherine will pick it up and share it with Anne that way. If you prefer not to share your question with everybody, I know some people prefer to do that, or just put it to everybody, and we'll pick those up. Lovely. Go and have a cup of coffee. You can, Catherine. Do people just stay signed in, or
Yes, if they stay signed in, but perhaps switched off their microphone and their camera so that we
Yeah.
don't have to listen to
And
20,000
they-
kettles boiling.
the switch off the sound as well, but and we'll be back well, Archdeacon Hilary at 11:30, and she's going to be reflecting particularly on us welcome and occasional offices. So I look forward to seeing you back at 12:30. Have a nice cup of coffee.
Fiona? Fiona, are you ready for tomorrow?
Hi, James.
Are you ready for tomorrow?
Only, yes, mainly, dreading it.
Yeah, my first one was a bit weird. Well, because it's a bit unknown, isn't it?
Yeah.
Is it only James?
Sorry?
Is it only James?
Yes.
Well, I'd like to know if minutes are all right from the Tidman Tower.
Ian, a special request from Ian. Are the minutes all right from the Tiddenham Tower meeting?
I confess I haven't looked.
Hasn't looked.
I think I'll need to send it out.
Yeah. He'll just send them out, I think.
Send them out, yeah.
Good morning, Fiona.
Oh, John, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you. How are you?
Oh, fine. Fat but fine.
Sorry?
Fat but fine.
Oh, I think that goes for us all.
COVID weight.
I think the chocolate industry has done very well during the lockdown.
Yeah. Not to mention the wine industry.
Gin for me.
You keeping busy?
Oh gosh, yes. Finding time to draw breath this week has been quite a challenge.
Yeah.
I had a funeral postponed, which has never happened before because the death certificate had to be changed. So that actually took the pressure off a little this week. But
Yeah.
it's going to renew pressure next week. So
Yeah.
it's fine.
Well, I haven't been doing any. I've got my first one this week because all that, the age limit and all the rest of it.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah, I think it's good. It's a bit like sort of patting your head and rubbing your tummy, isn't it? Because you've got to keep your eye. There's all these other things to be thinking about at the same time. But there you go.
But sadly, I thoroughly enjoyed being locked down. It was great. My holiday in the garden, doing gardening. Lots of.
My only problem is my 8 sister-in-laws.
Oh my goodness.
8 sister-in-laws and 1 sister. Doesn't matter, I can cope with anything that goes on in the parishes and in the benefit, but that lot took my head in.
Does that suggest there's 8 brothers as well?
Sorry?
8 brothers as well.
No, my husband's got 5 sisters, and I've got 3 brothers.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. So there's thousands of us out there.
Yeah. Excellent.
Almost 7 brides for 7 brothers, but not quite, is it?
Oh, I couldn't see my family marrying his family. No, that just wouldn't. That definitely wouldn't work.
Be less Christmas presents to buy. You could do it all joint. You see, that's what I was thinking.
Oh dear.
What does your cup say, Joan?
Mine is the reader's one.
Ah.
I thought it was appropriate for today. I have to be careful which cups I do use when I Zoom.
Now we want to see the inappropriate ones, or is that just me?
No. That's all of us.
They're not rude. It just, one in particular, some people might not like.
Oh, please go and get it out of the cupboard.
I think it was Bishop Roberts we all wanted to see, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Bishop Roberts has a very large collection of religious tat, I have to say. It's quite impressive.
I noticed Bishop Robert started by asking us all about the books behind us, but he doesn't seem to have many behind him.
It's probably gone to a different room so we don't get book envy, I expect.
Oh, right.
James is the best background. James is the best background.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's that Langesti retreat near Brecon.
It's just because the rainbow's coming out of your head as if you're some sort of
gold at the end, pot of gold at the end of the rainbow.
Maybe James is the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. Yes.
Well, Joan and I stood and watched lambs being born in that field. Do you remember, Joan?
Yeah. My son was up there the other day, sending me lovely pictures. Yeah. He was right on a speedboat in the middle of the lake, dressed as a teddy bear.
As one does.
As one does. As one does.
And I've typed a chat and it just seems to be stuck at the bottom of the screen, but I can't find a thing that says send. Do you just type it and leave it?
No, just press enter.
I haven't got an enter. Oh, press enter on
the screen, on your pad, on your keypad.
Yeah, that worked.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, that worked. Thank you.
One thing lockdowns taught us to be more cool, hasn't it? Ooh.
A little bit.
A little bit, yeah. Yeah.
I like your question.
Thank you.
We've tried to train welcomers up. We haven't had much chance to try it, but they still seem very reserved and not really. It's really difficult. It's really, really difficult.
I went on that welcoming course I mentioned, and the guy had some horrendous stories, as you can imagine. The one I liked was he and his wife went the week before he had to speak to them, and they were obviously going to have coffee at the back. He hadn't introduced himself. So he and his wife went to get the coffee. Someone said, "Oh, no, this is only for the rectors. You shake hands with the vicar at the door on the way out."
What course was that? I'm sorry, I missed it. I've only just turned myself on.
It was a course that the diocese arranged from a expert from, I think, Lichfield Diocese, who came and ran a course on being a welcoming church. And he has.
Okay. Oh, I missed that. So I got to move. The sun's in my eyes.
When I was at theological college, I'd been doing some painting one day, and I was still in my painting shorts covered in paint, and thought, but I will go to church. So I didn't normally go to Christ Church in Bristol, but I thought I'll go to Christ Church. I fancy some lively worship. So rocked up at Christ Church. I was late. I was greeted by somebody who ushered me to the front. So I walked the length of the church covered in paint. I then sat next to somebody who was one of the welcomers, because she had a big badge saying welcome on it. And she proceeded not to speak to me for the entire service or afterwards.
Yeah, I've been there while on holiday. You know, they say, "Oh, lovely to see you. Where are you from?" At the door, and then they, "Oh, do stay and have a coffee." So you stay, you queue for a coffee, and you stand there, and nobody speaks to you.
Yeah. I just to give you an opposite story. As a child on holiday with my parents, we went to church, and it was the Sunday school prize giving. And although I was only there on holiday, had never been before, they gave me a prize too. I thought that was wonderful, and I've always remembered it.
We had a stranger come into my church one Sunday morning, and at the coffee afterwards, she said, "I hope you don't mind me saying, you're obviously a very welcoming church, the way you're all busy talking to each other, but no one has spoken to me." And I said, "I'm jolly glad you told us, because we need to sort that."
Yeah.
Yeah, and Fiona, you're absolutely right. You know, you remembered your positive, and people remember their negatives. Someone once said to us that when they first came to church, they sat in 3 different seats. and each time they were told to move 3 times in one day, one service. But they came back because the vicar, the rector, as they left, was very, very welcoming. But yes, it's a really difficult topic.
Yeah, right. Going to church for the first time when we moved to Glasgow, and we were very warmly welcomed, and people said to us, are you doing anything for lunch? Come back for lunch, which was superb.
I was told a tale by the vicar in my previous parish, and he said that a gentleman came into church and he had a hat on, and when he sat down, somebody touched him and said, "You've got your hat on, would you mind removing it?" He said, thank you for that. And several times through the service, various people, as the service progressed, touched him and said, "You got your hat on." And anyway, towards the end of the service, as he was going out, the vicar said to him, "Well, it's lovely to see you," he said, "but did you not know you've had your hat on throughout all of the service?" And he said, "Yes. And do you not know I've been coming to this church for 3 years, and that's the first time that people have spoken to me?" And that's a true story, as God is my witness. So that, I think that to me stuck in my mind, and therefore whenever I approach church or people coming into the church, you always try to make them welcome, not just at the start, but throughout if you can, and then at the end to make sure that they're looked after from hospitality's perspective. So anyway, that's my little story, so I hope you don't mind me sharing.
Yeah, to make a point, one Sunday about we weren't as welcoming as we thought we were. I got a regular member of the congregation, this was in one of my little churches, to dress up in some really, really scruffy clothes, a little bit smelly, and shuffle into church. And actually she felt really, really ostracized. Nobody noticed it was her, and she felt really shunned, and it was a real wake-up call to the church.
I had an occasion at a church where I was welcomed warmly on 4 or 5 occasions as a new person. And I have to say, that did not feel much like a welcome. I presume there was a welcome rota, but had they not seen me? Had they not seen me having a coffee after church? It really did feel that perhaps a welcome needs to actually be more than just what is said at the door.
Just listening to the story about the hat, I can remember visiting a cathedral when my son was really tiny, and it was a blazing hot day. He was about 3 and he had a baseball hat on because of the sun. And we walked into the cathedral, and the first thing the welcomer at the door said to him was, "Has your mother not brought you up properly? Don't you know that you don't wear a hat in here?" Oh. And I'm afraid we left, and I wrote a letter. Well, you can imagine how we felt. But it was, really, and I can still feel how that was.
Imagine if the person had some sort of issue, like where they'd had, sorry to just blurt it out, like cancer or something like that, and they had hair loss. There could be a reason why people are wearing it. Anyway, how rude.
I have to say, though, it was one of my pet hates, being an ex-military man. We were always taught when and when not to wear a hat. And I felt that coming into church was a sign of respect. And I did actually say to this young chap who walked into church once, I said, would you mind removing your hat as a sign of respect? He said no. And then I said, fine, thank you. And I thought about it long and reflected on that after, and I realized it makes no odds what you're wearing on your head or what you're wearing on your body, as long as you're in church and you're respecting the love of Christ. And it changed my view on that, always. So
it's a good point about the possibility of cancer or some similar thing. Given the current situation with COVID and people not wearing masks, we're seeing quite a few cases where people are being abused and have a good reason not to wear a mask. And I think it very often comes down to, like everybody else, we make false assumptions. We are too quick to assume we know what the person's situation is.
Other people make assumptions as well, don't they? I was going into church on one occasion, and there was a lady with a little girl looking very hesitant, wondering whether to go in on a Saturday afternoon. And I said, "Can I help you?" And she said, "Yes, we've lost our cat. Could we go into your church to look for it?" And I said, "Well, it's not my church, it's your church as well, but please come in." And she got just inside the door and stopped. And I said, "Well, you better have a look." "Oh, can we move around?" I said, "Yes, you won't find it if it's under a pew standing at the door." She obviously had an idea that she was trespassing.
Yeah.
Yes, it's so important that with funerals and weddings and that we just do our best to make the families don't come to church very often so welcome, because that they go away and then they say, "Oh, the funeral went well," and we were, that is such a for us as readers, taking funerals is so important for welcoming, I think. Yeah.
I think Archdeacon Hilary is going to help us reflect on that a bit further. Are you not? Surely. And poor Archdeacon Hilary is eating a chocolate bar.
No, I'm eating a date.
A date. Very good. Very good.
I'm trying to avoid chocolate bars before tea time.
That's very good. I thought we had a bishop staff meeting on Thursday. And I'm trying to avoid eating chocolate as well. And somebody bought this great big bag of little sort of sharing bags of chocolate and Maltesers and things. Oh, that was hard work. That was hard work.
It's not Lent, Bishop Robert.
I know. It may not be Lent, but I expanded a little over lockdown.
Didn't we all?
Well, we all.
I expanded, and I got to that stage where I thought, I think my shirts are shrinking.
All clothes shrink quite regularly.
Yeah. Dear, oh dear.
Bishop, could you give notice of that question? My wife has nearly fallen off the chair laughing.
Thanks, Roger. Dear, oh dear. Well, that's coming out your way for your cooked breakfast. I think that's.
Yeah, I think she was relating your comment to somebody not a long way away from her.
Right. Yeah. So my cooking skills are limited, but the one thing I can cook reasonably well is breakfast. I spent lockdown perfecting my ability to do poached eggs, which has been particularly fun. How are we doing? A minute to go. Are we one or two just on their way back, hopefully? Yeah. And there may be others who are listening, but without. Yeah. Good. And have we been getting some questions coming in? Some really challenging questions for the bishops and the archdeacons, which I'll make sure that I divert to someone else.
We can have more.
Good. So if they're going straight to Anne, that means we don't get to see them first, doesn't it? It'll be just like question time. Jolly good. It's 11:30, so it is time, I think, we get underway again. Archdeacon's returned from the cathedral, where I think you've been swearing on a marriage license.
I have. I've been swearing, or they have been swearing an affidavit to get their common license to marry.
Fantastic. And you are going to help us further as we reflect on the ministry of welcome, and particularly, I think, around the pastoral offices. Archdeacon Hilary, really good to have you with us. And thank you. We look forward to what you have to share with us. And as as with Archdeacon Phil, it would be really good to just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you at the beginning.
I've just noticed Sherry's comment, which has completely put me off my stride, which is wonderful. Sherry, thank you. I will treasure that. That was great. So yes, I'm Archdeacon Hilary, and I've been in the diocese since January of the year before this one. So coming up to 2 years, if my maths is correct, and really thoroughly enjoying being here. Especially working with Archdeacon Phil. I thought I would get that bit in quickly. So thank you, Anne, for asking us to come and be part of this today. It's a real pleasure to do so. My background is in multi-parish rural ministry. That's all I've done, really. I was also a chaplain before that, and before I was ordained, I came from a suburban church, so I do have experience of different kinds of church communities, but my ministry has been in rural multi-parish ministry, and that is what makes my heart sing. So as we think about welcome, I want to begin with a few words which I'm sure you know inside out and back to front, because they describe the mission strand of the work of a reader. The calling of every local church is to form and build, sustain and support men and women whose task is nothing less than reshaping and transforming the world. Readers and lay ministers are uniquely placed to enable this work. And I think the welcome of God is right at the heart of that work of transformation. And one way we live that is through the work of storytelling. We are story shaped as human beings. We live our story, and we hear stories, and we live our story alongside other people who are living their story. So another quotation from Bishop Martin Snow: "We desperately need skilled teachers who will live God's story, tell the story, and accompany people as they explore the full implications of becoming part of the story." I'm just going to read that again. We desperately need skilled teachers who will live God's story, tell the story, and accompany people as they explore the full implications of becoming part of the story. I think welcome and hospitality is what we do when we live the story well, alongside others who are living their story, and doing all of it in the light of God's story. So, of course, I'll put the quote in a bit later on. Thank you. So, for me, one of my absolute passions in parish ministry was the opportunity to be with people in the most critical moments of their stories, alongside them as they marry one another, rejoicing with them as they celebrate the birth of their children, lamenting with them as they mourn loved ones. The pastoral offices, baptisms, weddings, and funerals are rooted in welcome and in hospitality. The kind of hospitality that creates really generous and unforced space. Space where we can commit to walking alongside others as they live out that story and tell that story to others. And I think when we inhabit that place of deep welcome, we are truly able to respond to Bishop Martin's injunction as they explore how their own story fits in God's larger story. I absolutely believe that occasional offices can be the means by which people discover faith for the first time or re-engage with faith after a time of not having been engaged with faith. I don't think that that's a universally held view, but I would absolutely defend it to the hilt. I think people really do come to explore their Christian faith through the occasional pastoral offices. I think sometimes we have to put our hands up and really defend that position, It's always a both and, but sometimes when the shiny initiatives happen, we can lose sight of the absolute core and heart of our pastoral offices as being that place of welcome and hospitality. I'm really happy to talk about that later, but I really feel passionate and strongly about it. I think that creating that really hospitable space in our worshipping communities must rely on collaboration and shared ministry, ordained and lay. The ordained person conducting the wedding or the reader conducting the funeral should not ideally be working alone. As we know, if those pastoral offices are to be truly profound and rooted experiences, there needs to be careful preparation, real attention to the services themselves, and then good continuing relationships. Now, as we all know, and for all sorts of reasons, that is not always possible. We can rehearse all of those reasons, but it remains our aspiration. And readers often, I know you will find yourselves in the places where those relationships can often be built really strongly, because you are part of so many strands of your local communities. So therefore, the building of those ongoing relationships can often be something that really can fall to you and be part of your work. The work of baptism and marriage preparation, organising those really special services for anniversaries, inviting families to festivals, inviting people to be part of the social life of the church, as well as the worshipping life of the church, pastoral visiting for the sick and the bereaved, conducting funerals. These are all things that can and do involve readers, clergy, and other lay colleagues too. They involve all of us in different ways. As we're talking about pastoral offices being about story sharing and about welcome, I want to share a story with you. You will have your own stories on this, which you may well want to share in your discussions later. I hope that the story I'm about to share says something about the opportunity of these pastoral offices, that the opportunity they give us to share the good news of Jesus Christ. And I hope that the story I've chosen to tell you speaks about relationship, connection, and perhaps above all, a recognition that the exploration of faith can take a very long time. It can and is the journey of a lifetime, and mission is for the long haul, not just the quick moment. This is the story. Some years ago, a young woman left a difficult marriage in another part of the country and returned to her family home with her young baby. Needing support and friendship, she reached out to a family she had known from childhood. The family of a key lay leader in a church in a neighbouring community. Part of the support that family offered was that key lay leader recognising that what the woman needed in all her distress and upset was to celebrate the birth of that baby. Thankfully, the clergy person in that lay leader's church was very welcoming, very hospitable in their own right, and recognised that baptism was going to be important. And so the baby was baptised, the family were welcomed unconditionally. Life became busy, and over the next 15 years or so, the young woman didn't go back to church, but she continued to work with that local key lay leader, not in anything to do with church or faith, but in one of the local uniformed organisations for young people. Many years later, that young woman met someone and wanted to marry again. And as she was thinking about getting married, with her now teenage son at her side, she remembered his baptism. She asked her friend, that key lay leader, if it would be possible for her to return to that church to be married. The original clergy person had gone and I'd arrived. She and her future husband, the teenage son, and I formed a really strong relationship. They started to attend church regularly. They got married. They continued to attend church regularly. They joined study groups. Her husband was confirmed. They became PCC members. They took on all manner of responsibilities within that worshipping community. And the woman started to explore her vocation to licensed ministry. Such is the power of the pastoral offices. Such is the commitment we need to show to allow stories to grow and to develop in God's time. I'm going to tell you another story, a story which doesn't specifically relate to lay ministry, but does speak again of that opportunity we have to work together, to collaborate in our settings, to provide the best possible welcome and hospitality we can to those seeking pastoral offices. Some years ago, I had a call from a businessman living in Northern Ireland. He'd lived away from the area in which I was ministering for years, but he had very happy memories of it, although no rooted connection with one of the villages for which I had care. And it transpired that whilst working in Russia, he had met and fallen in love, and the couple now planned to marry. The wedding took place in Moscow, but more than anything, he wanted to have a blessing in this village church. I said yes. The community, the ministry team rallied round. They offered the best possible welcome that they could. It was a beautiful service. I even managed a little terrible Russian, and that, I thought, was that. Sometime later, he wrote to me again. He explained to me how much the whole experience had meant to them. He talked about re-evaluating his life and his priorities. He had a work blog on which he spoke and talked and wrote openly about that wedding service, about the experience of the blessing, his experience of God's love, the welcome and hospitality that they had encountered in that community. And so we kept in touch, partly through the blog, partly through email, and then 2 years later he phoned me. They would be spending Christmas back in that local area. Would I be prepared to baptize their new baby? The only time that would possibly work for them was Christmas Eve. You can imagine my first reaction in a multi-parish benefice of 6 churches when somebody says, will you baptize my baby on Christmas Eve? The community, the ministry team rallied round again. Amazing hospitality was offered. I baptized the baby. And that, I thought, was that. A year later, they returned, this time surprising me. There they were for midnight communion. We continue to be in touch. They remain connected to that local area. The conversation and their exploration are ongoing. That's the privilege. That's the long haul. The pastoral offices allow God's story to be told powerfully in the midst of our ordinary human stories. When you talk together in a moment, you might like to briefly share some of your own stories relating to occasional and pastoral offices. And then it would be really good if you could spend a little while just reflecting on how we can provide the best welcome and hospitality we possibly can to those seeking and experiencing pastoral offices in these very constrained and challenging times. How can we, as we live through this experience of COVID, continue to respond to those who still want their babies baptized, who are still falling in love, who still want the church to recognize their relationships, and sadly, who are mourning and needing to say goodbye to their loved ones? How can we do that well? And how can we do that together? Thank you, Bishop Robert.
Larry, thank you so much, and thank you for taking us back to some of that sense of core business. In a way, it's what both you and Archdeacon Phil have been helping us to reflect upon, that core business of us as a church, our welcome, and then deeply into the pastoral offices, and that way in which we engage with our communities. Archdeacon Hillary, are you happy to put those questions into the chat? That would be.
I sent 2 questions to Catherine. Have you got those, Catherine?
Brilliant. You have, fantastic. The questions are there in the chat. So it's 14 minutes to, and what shall we do? We've got a few minutes. We're okay for time. So 15 minutes or so.
Perfect.
Yeah, if we have 15 minutes or so, then that'll give us a little bit of time to catch up on things. And don't forget to keep on thinking about those skewering questions that you're going to ask to bishops and archdeacons when we come for our plenary at the end. That's great. So Catherine, if you're happy to put us into groups through the magic and the wonder of Zoom, let's go.
Hello.
Hang on a minute. I just need to assign you to. Do any of you know which room you were in before? This is not a room necessarily. Does anyone know who you were in a room with?
I think I was room 4 before, but
you were room.
We could have this. We could have a different room. That's all right.
This is the middle, so if anyone comes back, then they're going to end up in here with their questions. So I might just move you back to the rooms if that's okay. Is that all right?
Yeah.
Right. So room 4 for Sherry. Do we know which rooms you were in?
Paula and Miriam and John.
See. Yeah. So that's room 8 for Patricia. David, do you know which room you were in? No. Anyone? Any memory of the names of the people with you?
So I arrived late for some reason. Well, I arrived late, so I just was in a room just briefly, or perhaps I came into here. I'm not sure.
I may put you in room 9 if that's all right.
Fine.
There we go. Derek, do you know which room you were in?
I have no idea at all. I managed to join into it a bit late, I'm afraid.
Did you? That's absolutely fine. If I pop you in, which rooms have got fewer people? If I pop you in room 15, if that's okay, and I'll just have a quick chat with Ruth and make sure we can get her sound working. There we go. Right, Ruth, can you speak? No, you can't speak. And it looks like your microphone is on. Do you have on your computer in front of you, do you have some buttons? Sound. Looks like a little loud hailer along the very top. On the top of your keyboard. Hang on, if I take a picture and then I can show you. So you can see ones that look kind of like the ones along the top. Volume buttons. If you're using are you using a laptop or a PC? You've got those. You try those and see the volume, see if that works.
Exhausting, and hopefully we've given you enough time to move about and have a break. Do keep those questions coming up in chat, and I shall keep an eye on that. I think we'll start off by going straight to Bishop Rachel, who's joined us. If that's all right, Bishop Rachel.
Absolutely fine.
First question, which is a really important one in these times. What do you make of the challenges and how we respond to issues of loneliness and mental health in these days?
A really good question, a big question. I'd start by saying the really important thing, first of all, is to recognise it and name it. And I think it asks us to be looking and listening to who is not present. I'm really aware through these times of how some people have been more included with doing things over Zoom, and how so many people have been excluded. I don't just mean from our coming together in worship, but and it's not just the people we immediately think about. I mean, there are all the elderly people living on their own, but also those people who are really struggling, our children and our young people, people with disabilities, people with mental health problems, so many people who we might not be thinking about. And I think just to think about our communities, think about the streets, think about the organisations, the clubs that aren't meeting, and I think be asking that question, then together be saying, how might we approach this? And I think the last thing I'd say on that is we're not always very good at looking at who our partners can be. And there are many really, really good charities and organisations out there that actually, if we just ask that question of and said, how can we work with you? So the young carers I've had a lot to do with during lockdown. Actually, we haven't got to do it all ourselves, but we can join in with other people who are doing things because it's part of our Christian calling to be ensuring that all are at the table. That'd be my starting place, Anne.
Thank you, Bishop Rachel. Mark, you've made a really lovely response. Mark Bick, would you like to come in and make that to the group?
Just saying, for me, that this look at what Bishop Rachel said, looking for who's not present, I found it very easy to avoid doing during lockdown. You can just disappear into the garden and sod everybody else. I'm just going to survive this and play with my own 3-year-old. And but it's certainly a tug on my heart and my mind and my spirit, and it was good to be reminded of that. And it is possible to connect with. I was really struck just in inviting some of the other young parents around to our garden and sharing stories that we're so blessed to have such a huge garden, and there's another one at the top of the housing list, but no hope of getting anywhere, in a first floor flat with two young under 5 boys, and struggling, really struggling.
We are seeing an increase in anxiety, aren't we, at this time throughout the nation. I wonder if one of the archdeacons might like to make a comment at all.
Oh, sorry, Phil, you go.
No, I was just going to pick up on Mark's comment about connection. I think one of the things that's really painful for a lot of people, and we don't speak about it, is the loss of touch. Touch is such an important part of ministry, really, and accompanying people. And I think we need to find new ways of making that connection, even though we can't reach out and hug and even shake hands. Even not shaking hands feels really inhospitable to me and unwelcoming. And maybe there's something about, therefore, making, as Mark's just talked about, making space to be a bit more vulnerable verbally, even if we can't physically.
There was something I heard on the Today programme this morning about a programme that's working with children from 5 to 12 who are experiencing anxiety at the moment. And one of the things they were talking about, and this is about working with families to support their children and helping families to do that. And they were saying quite often when we do connect, we're quick to reassure. And actually, that may not always be the right response, that actually listening to the pain and being alongside people in lament is really important, rather than just immediately reassuring. And that's been going around in my mind this morning, in how we hear one another, Because on one level, when I have a bad day, I want someone to reassure me, but I also want someone to hear how it feels. And I think there is that connecting in a very real way, which can be quite hard and quite costly.
Can I just add one more thing in there, Anne, which I think the other thing about connection, picking up from what some other people said, is that often when we're anxious, we want to connect with people who make us feel at ease, a bit like Hilary was saying. And I think one of the challenges is, how do we connect with the people, even in the old days, we would have found it hard to connect with, the people who will make us feel uncomfortable, because the danger is that we want to connect with those who will make us feel comfortable. I think that's a real challenge, and something I'd really like us to go on reflecting on. It's not always about agreeing, it is about connecting.
I think for me, all of it gets summed up in that phrase, which I know in some ways we don't like, and I don't terribly like, and it's there in the chat as well, social distancing. And so we tend to talk about physical distancing quite often, but actually say it in the right way. There is a sense about social distancing which is really positive, because our distancing is social in the way in which it is maybe physically keeping apart but socially connected. I say it to people quite often in communion service when I'm talking about how we come and receive communion, in that sense that actually as we come we need to be so aware of the other. We're actually not just on our own in travel, but we're aware of the other and how we relate to the other in doing that. And we need that not just to be inside our churches. We need that to be in all the ways that we've just been hearing about, in the way in which we live our lives, understanding, connected, not just the ones. That's the kind of great thing about communion, is that it's for all of us, and that has to be part of our ministry and mission in the wider world, aware, connected, inclusive.
Robert Paul, you've responded to Archdeacon Phil with that longing to touch somebody kindly on the shoulder. And I think there's a real sense in this time that we have a real need for Christ to stand in the gap between us, in the space between us, to know that Christ stands in that place. And like the old Iona song, he makes that touching space between us. So I think we probably need to hold that in mind as we share the peace at a distance, and as we offer words of condolence. Entrusting people to Christ's touch in the deep places of their hearts. That sense of connection or disconnection that we're experiencing at the moment is played out in the way that we're finding more people engaging online with our churches. One of the wonders of this time is that people can sneak in the back and we don't even know they're there at the back sometimes. And a question has been asked about asking us if we can explore ways in which online congregations can feel safe to connect with us over social media. So how do we move these people from sort of the back and just watching to actually engaging with the church over social media? Bishops, have you any experience of this? How do we pull people in?
Which one is that to Bishop Rachel?
Let's go to Bishop Robert first, and then Bishop Rachel.
Just clarify the question for me, Anne.
So, in what ways can we feel safe? Can our online congregation feel safe in connecting with us over social media?
So I think sort of my experience, both of the bishop, perhaps even more so as an archdeacon, has been social media as a really great joy, and then as something which, if we're not careful, is also potentially extraordinarily destructive. So for me, there is a sense of we need to use it, we need to make it our friend, but we need to know how we are using it well. And I think it is that sense about Well, we were talking earlier. Hilary was talking. Actually, Hilary was talking about how we tell our story and how we link our story to the gospel story and to God's story and to the stories of our communities. And I think looking for those ways of using it and making contact and being human. But I think also, and actually Bishop Rachel, I may want to comment further on this, because in a sense, I know you pick up quite a bit more of both the positive and the negative stuff as well that comes your way, using it in a considered way as well. Not sure that's the best of my answers, because I think it is a real joy, but it requires care. But I think in the end, actually, we do need to be there. We can't not be there, but it's how we use it. Bishop Rachel, do you want to follow up on that?
Yes, I'm not sure I quite got the nub of the question, but I think for me, there's something about, if it's about people who are joining over Zoom digitally, I wasn't sure it's about social media or more about digital connection, but I think there's something about how do we make, whether it's over social media or digitally over Zoom or YouTube, whatever it is, how do we make genuine connection? Because that's the thing about our Zoom services and our social media, is often we think we're connecting. You know, I love it when we talk about Facebook friends. Well, you know, most of those probably aren't friends. I'm not on Facebook, but actually there's something about how do we move to a place of deeper relationships. The people that are connecting on Zoom, sneaking in, as Anne puts, it's a lovely idea, you know, they can sneak in and be in the back row. Actually, how are we providing safe opportunities to take that deeper? So it may be offering people a smaller group experience on Zoom or a phone conversation. And then I think us paying very careful attention to what we do put, as Bishop Roberts said, on social media. And it can be very good to let people know things are happening. I never get into conversations on social media in the same way that I often get into conversations on email, because that's not really deepening our relationship. Whereas having conversations and creating those safe places to have telephone conversations, or even now distance, real conversations. I think we've got to work hard at that, not just say, isn't it great, we've now got 100 extra people on Zoom. How are we providing an opportunity for people to take the next step? And there's quite a lot of work being done on that nationally as well as locally at the moment. So hopefully you'll be able to share that more with you. But I think for me, the key word is relationship. Yeah. Where is it not simply just connection, but where are we taking that deeper into relationship? If we keep that in mind, I think it will help us.
And social media, Zoom, wherever, that remembering that what we are talking to is another human being.
Yeah.
I think just holding on that sense of the humanity of the other, this is the reality of that. And that's what I don't see in some of the more unpleasant sides of that.
Yeah.
Archdeacon Phil.
Yes, Anne. Same question. I don't think I can add too much. I think one of the things that Zoom has done, we talked earlier about with removing hurdles one by one from anything that might make people ask questions about who we are and what we're doing. And I think Zoom and YouTube services have given people who would never ever cross the threshold of a church building because they'd be terrified, just to have a look and say, oh, maybe that's not quite what I expected happened inside a building. So there's a huge opportunity there. And the real challenge then is how do we turn that into real connection rather than distance connection?
I think there's something there, Anne, as well, I'd add in about what I said earlier about being inclusive and exclusive. So at one level, people have really done great things on Zoom and talked about how we're being more inclusive. Some of what I've seen on Zoom has been brilliant. Some of what I've seen I still felt very exclusive, so that actually people coming in wouldn't be able to do exactly what Archdeacon Phil said and just felt, oh, I could just come and be part of this. Yeah. So even the language we use and how we talk about we and us and them, and I think just paying real attention to that sort of thing is really, really important. Some of what I've seen on Zoom sometimes is simply just doing what we did in our church buildings just on Zoom and actually making people feel more uncomfortable. So actually paying attention to what would this feel like if I was just that mystery worshipper or I didn't know anything about it, we've got a great opportunity to help explain. So when people say things like, as we all know in the Bible it says, well, perhaps we don't all know that. And so I think just helping that inclusivity and paying attention to that is really helpful.
So I mean, if I can just pick up on that, I think there's a principle that applies just as much as Zoom as it does in a church building, which is so many churches I go to have no expectation that anybody new would come. So all our language is addressed. And I would always say, whether they come or not, always expect there might be someone who has no idea what you're talking about in your community.
Yeah.
And that's a great place to start thinking about welcome.
Yeah.
Hilary.
I'm going to make a real archdeacon comment now, which is just about thinking really carefully about worship that happens online and about the footprint that it leaves. So as well as all the care around liturgy and welcome and hospitality, it's thinking a little bit about if that service is going to be there and left there, just what do we need to be aware of? You know, it's really important that there are things we just need to be very, very conscious of, just as we would be in a church building, but with that whole thing about the long, as with social media, the long footprint of that. So that will be true with our services that may be on YouTube for some time.
So Catherine's sharing with us that these conversations are being recorded. If anybody isn't happy for it to be shared, if they can get in touch with Catherine, then she will ensure that doesn't happen. But if everybody's happy for it to be shared, then they will be available to look back on. We've had a question.
Because I think that's particularly for the reader community. I don't think we're going to publish it on the Darson website.
No. Just within this.
It's essentially for other readers who've not been able to be here today.
Yeah. So a question has been asked, which is about church reordering. Somebody has quietly asked in a corner, anonymously, whether any of you have experienced reordering within your own churches. And I'd like to sort of turn that question around a bit and think about how we structure our churches to be places of welcome. How do we actually make our churches places of welcome? And take that first to Archdeacon Phil.
Thank you very much, Anya. I mean, I use that quote from Richard Giles from Repitching the Tent because actually when I was a vicar, we did a major reordering and I kept coming back to this question, what does this building say? And what Richard Giles does in Repitching the Tent is says, whether you like it or not, your building and the interior and the pews and everything else speak volumes. And I think the trouble is sometimes when you get so used to something, you know, you move into a new house and you think, oh, I couldn't possibly live with that wallpaper. And then 5 years later, you think, oh yeah, I was going to change that wallpaper. You just get used to it. And so asking people to come in who don't come and say, what does this say to you? And is that what we want to say about the welcome of God? One of the things I often used to ask people who said, oh no, we can't possibly spend money on getting rid of these pews. They may be very uncomfortable, but you know, they've been there for years, is would you treat guests in your own home the way we treat guests in this building? And that's a really telling question, because everybody said, no, of course I wouldn't. I wouldn't serve this coffee. I wouldn't turn the heating off. I would, you know, and actually, I think it's a really good question to ask ourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. Bishop Rachel, do you want to come in?
Yes, gosh, lots I could say on that. Yes, involved in two church buildings in my time in parish ministry. One was a huge major reordering and involved moving out of the church for a long time. I can echo all that Archdeacon Phil has said. I think there's particularly that bit of getting other people to come in and say, what does this say to you? I think there's something I really like about having ways that people can see into the church buildings. So I love it, and reorderings of putting glass doors. I have a story myself of once being on holiday, and there was a casino attached to our hotel, and that the door was just open. You could push open and go in, and I never did. And on the last day, guys said to me, do you want to go and have a look in there? I said, oh no, you know, I've never been inside one of those before. I went in and I lasted about 5 minutes and recognised that I I didn't know what the rules were or what went on. But had I been able to watch for a bit and just see what went on the other side of that door, I'm not suggesting our church should be casinos, but there's something about actually how we allow people just to have, you know, it's very hard to push open the door of a church building. I think there's also something for me about recognizing, you talked about story, that the shape of the church building is part of history and the story that's got there. So how you manage all that thing about we're not getting rid of the story, we're not diminishing all that's gone before. And I've done things with congregations around telling that story. Could say more about that. And I think the other thing I certainly used to feel when I was an archdeacon, I don't know what the archdeacons would say, is that people paid so much attention to the inside of their buildings and rarely thought about the outside. If you walk past the outside of your church building, what messages does that give? Because often there are curly, rotting notice boards that speak of death. There are weeds that speak of death. Why would anyone want to go up the path inside? And then notice boards which say, we welcome you to come and join us. What does that say? We think we're being welcoming and we're not. So I would say start with the exterior of the building and really look at what the messages are there. But certainly they're stressful. The one other thing I'd say, great to have flexible space in buildings. I always insisted that there was one place that was unchanged, so a little prayer space that could never be meeting space, chatting space, that said in the midst of all our community, and we want this building to be used for the wider community, God sits at the heart of it. And there is always a prayer space that is unchanged and everything else can be changed. And check you think about children and young people. Too often people say, well, we don't have any children here. Well, we won't have any children if when you walk in through the door, it doesn't look like a really lovely place rather than two manky, cuddly toys in a damp corner. Put them at the front. There's controversial, but that's what I'd always recommend.
I can agree absolutely with that, though I'm now, if any of you have seen the film Sister Act, I now have a particular scene from the casino at the end of that, really, but that's another matter. But that sense about home, that place of encounter with the living God, and that extends right the way through. When I went to my last parish, of which I was incumbent, where we did do some significant reordering, but I remember when I was first there, people asked me if we had a toilet. Well, amazingly, we did. We used to have to say, go through that door, turn right, and go back 50 years, because it was a pretty awful place. And actually, all those things are really important for us to be able to practice the hospitality of God, that welcome that we have been talking about.
Hilary.
Yes, I wanted to say something which comes from Richard Giles's book, Repitching the Tent. Please don't do this without consulting the DAC first. But one of the things he recommends, which is very powerful, is that you choose a beautiful day and you remove everything that's movable from the inside of the church and put it outside the church, and then take a good hard look at the building. And as you begin to think about reordering, think about actually what everything says about God's story and what the building is about, what all those things you've removed are about, and really have good conversations. That's a little idea. But I also wanted to pick up Sherry's wonderful comment about our hearts and our attitudes. Reorderings, in my experience, take a long time because it is a work of the heart. And whether we try and address that before or whether we accept that it's part of the process, Sherry is absolutely right. It's about our heart, it's about our love for Jesus Christ, it's about our love for people, our welcome, our hospitality, and it's inextricably linked with who we are and who we are under God.
And never start with an architect who says, let me look at this building and tell you what we could do with it. Because as Archdeacon Hilary said, it's about who we are as the people of God and our vision. And does the inside of our church building reflect the vision and all that we want to be? So I think that's a great idea. So I look forward to all these pews outside on a hot sunny day.
And if you can't do anything else, do the porch, because that's really important.
So Archdeacon Phil started us at the beginning of this day with this concept of the gospel being one word, welcome. And I'd like to invite our panel just at the close of this day, to share something personally, if I may ask you to do so, of how God is welcoming you in these days. So how is that gospel of welcome coming to you to be received afresh in your vocation and ministry? And you can all think about that and put it in the chat. And how is God actually offering his welcome to you at this time? And I'm going to take a hand of who's ready to come in first. Probably Phil, I think. Yeah.
Mine's is quite a personal one. I've been struck this week on Tuesday. I had my father's funeral. He died 3 weeks ago. And he was he became a Christian in his late 20s, I think. He was a clergyman as well, and he lived his life, I think, as a minister of reconciliation. I saw that, and it's been hugely comforting to me as I spoke at his funeral to know that he is experiencing the welcome of God now in a way he's never really experienced it before. So I, that's not just telling a story about someone else, because that has again impacted me. And I spoke then about, as I mentioned, that lovely phrase from Romans 8 about the glorious freedom of the children of God that the whole of creation can enjoy. So it's made a big impact on my grieving to know that my dad is experiencing that, not as through a mirror, but now he knows fully, even as he is fully known.
Beautiful, thank you. Hilary.
Sorry, I had a bit of trouble unmuting. I want to say something quite personal too, and it's about being here. For me, God's welcome is coming through a real paradox at the moment. It feels as if my relationships with everybody with whom I live and work in this diocese are deepening all the time, which is a paradox when we can't be together in the ways that we want to. And yet the phone calls, the emails, the conversations, the times when we are together feel incredibly powerful. So that for me is something about the welcome of God in a time which is really difficult. And yet sometimes I'm overwhelmed by the depth of relationship. And I hope that says something for others as well.
Thank you. Bishop Robert.
Thank you. Really, really good question. When Phil was talking at the beginning of today, I know one way it's kind of obvious, but the word that I would always go to is love, which is not easy. I think so often when we think about love, we think about that kind of it's soft and it's soppy, and actually when we talk about God's love, it's hard and it's gritty and it's cross-shaped. And I think in these days, I think particularly at the moment, I recognise coming back after the summer, this feels like tough going. And I think Archdeacon is right, we are building relationships, but sometimes on Zoom, it's difficult, and it's more difficult when we're tired and we're not quite sure what's going to happen next. And I think just that importance in prayer and in the sacrament, and that sense of knowing that ultimately I am held in God's love. And that's there, whether I'm grumpy or whether I'm feeling fed up or whether I'm happy or joyful, or whether I've made an absolute mess of things. Just to remember, for me, to hold on to that sense of God's ultimate love for me, not because I have done anything, not because I deserve it, but simply because God loves me.
Thank you. Bishop Rachel.
Yeah, I think I'd echo a number of those things. And just picking up from where Bishop Robert left off, the first thing I wrote down is knowing that I am Rachel and I'm called by name, and I'm loved simply for being me. And there's been for me throughout all this time the paradox of constancy and change. So I've said repeatedly that sense of God being unchanging and God's love and faithfulness being unchanging, and absolutely knowing that every time I sit down for morning prayer early in the mornings or compline at the end of the day, just that sense of God's unchanging love, and that I am enough and yet I'm not enough. I'm enough in that God accepts me as I am and loves me, and we haven't been here before, and that actually I often talk about our brokenness and our beauty, and I think recognizing that I am broken, I am vulnerable, and that picks up on what Archdeacon Hilary is saying about relationships, really valuing receiving God's love and welcome through those around me, and yet also knowing that that there is beauty in me and in all of us, and actually recognizing that sort of my unique gifts and other people's unique gifts, and actually that God has called each of us by name. And in all of that, I found lighting a candle, when I light that candle, I often do that early in the morning when it's still dark, when I'm praying, and then when I blow it out and you watch the smoke rise and go into the day, but knowing actually that Christ's light is stronger than anything else that's going to come my way that day. And then I have the privilege of living by the cathedral, and as the cathedral clock strikes, it will go on striking every hour and quarter and half hour, regardless of what we all do, regardless of what I do. And that, again, just that sense that God's constancy and faithfulness is there, and actually, that's where I know God's welcome is unchanging. So yeah, just some thoughts around that.
Thank you, Bishop Robert.
Thank you. Thank you for a really good morning, and thank you for putting that together, Archdeacon Phil, Archdeacon Hilary. Thank you for your input and stimulating us to think. I'm going to pray with us, and we're going to say the grace together at the end of this. Just before we do that, Bishop Rachel, I wonder if I might come to you. If we've been all able to gather in the cathedral this afternoon, I'm sure you would have wanted to begin the service by saying something to the reader community as a whole. If you had one message for the reader community gathered here, I wonder what that might be.
Well, the first word would be thank you. And then I would pick up on what I've just said, is that you are unique and precious and called by name. And it's very easy in these times to look sideways. I don't know what sort of conversation you've had, but it's very easy to think, oh, I'm not being that person. Or, oh no, my context is far worse than that. And actually to know that you are enough in this present moment, and God will go on changing you. So there's something about look to who you are and say, what is it that I'm bringing to this? And I want to say thank you for the gift of you. And thank you for the privilege of sharing in ministry with you. Thank you.
And I absolutely echo that, the privilege of sharing in ministry with you. I know for both Bishop Rachel and I, and for the archdeacons, one of the sadnesses of the pandemic is that our normal travelling Sunday by Sunday to be physically with the communities of our diocese has been severely limited, though we've been able to start doing a little bit of that, and obviously we've been trying to join remotely where we can do so. But one of the things I particularly enjoy in that is in sharing in leading of worship with you as readers in the parishes where you are. Always when I come to a parish where there's a reader, that great sense of being able to share in that, modelling something of that shared ministry that we are called to. And so let me say thank you for that, and absolutely affirm that. Encourage you to be part of the conversations that we need to have over these coming weeks and months that Anne has been highlighting, and again we'll recirculate details of those after this. But as we continue to think and reflect on the nature of reader ministry. As I said at the beginning, it's really sad that we can't all be gathered together in the cathedral this afternoon for our Reader Day service. But do please keep those who will be gathered there, particularly Nigel and Ian, in your prayers as they come to be admitted as readers and licensed. The service begins at 3:30. I hope it begins at 3:30. So maybe this afternoon, wherever you are, around that time, if you could just hold those of us gathered in the cathedral in your prayers. But thank you for today. Particular thank you to Anne and to Jane, who is working with you. Is Jane on the call here today?
No, unfortunately she wasn't able to make it today.
But a huge thank you, and to you and through you to Jane, for your work as Warden of Readers. We are immensely fortunate to have you. Really grateful for that. And let's be quiet and pray at the end of our morning. We've been thinking quite a bit about well-being in other contexts this week, and this is the collect for today, which is good for us, for our well-being, for the well-being of the church, and for the well-being of all people. Almighty God, you have made us for yourself, and our hearts are restless till they find their rest in you. Pour your love into our hearts and draw us to yourself, and so bring us at last to your heavenly city, where we shall see you face to face. Through Jesus Christ, your Son, our Lord, who is alive and reigns with you in the unity of the Holy Spirit, one God, now and forever. Amen. It's now tradition in the Diocese of Gloucester, has been since the beginning of April, that at the end of such gatherings, we all unmute ourselves and we're going to say the grace together. Not a hope of saying it in unison. It will be a wonderful, as on the day of Pentecost, cacophony of noise, but reminds us of that unity that we share as those called by God. Thank you. It's been great to spend the morning with you. And let us pray together. The grace
of our Lord Jesus Christ, the love of God,
The fellowship of the Holy Spirit,
be with us all evermore.
Amen.
Amen. Now and forevermore. Amen. So, Corporal Jones.
Thank you. Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Really good to see everybody. Catherine, thank you for doing all the tech for us.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.